Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day. Jennifer is grateful for the opportunity to educate, empower, and inspire you with powerful conversations, insights, and new viewpoints. Here's your host, Jennifer J. Hammond.
Jennifer Hammond, and I love when I can also bring you more amazing, this one is amazing women who are trailblazers, who are really helping us be more healthy, be our best version of ourselves. And so I'm so excited about our next guest, Dr. Deb Matthew. She is known as the Happy Hormone Doctor. She is a best-selling author. She's an international speaker, educator, wife, and mom of 4 boys. But after suffering for years with fatigue and irritability, her quest to restore her personal health led her to change everything about her practice of medicine. She's been featured on many national podcasts, radio shows, broadcast shows, but she's also been included on NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox. So I am so excited. Dr. Deb, welcome.
Yay! I'm glad to be here.
Yay! I'm so glad to have you. So one thing that happens a lot, as you know, in my world is real estate. So as real estate agents, they're so stressed out. And right now, being in the year 2021, of course, last year during the crazy part of 2020 and the pandemic, we're still in the pandemic now in 2021, and real estate is booming, and it is so stressful. So let's talk about less stress for more success. How is that accomplished?
Yes. Well, we all know that when we're stressed out, we're not really at our best, right? And there are some real reasons for that. We have a stress hormone called cortisol, and cortisol goes up to help us cope with stress. So that's great in the short term. The problem is when you have stress day in and day out, then cortisol gets really out of whack. And when cortisol is out of whack, it does not make us feel good. And there are some really important things that we need to know about, especially if your job requires you to have competitive drive and assertiveness and confidence. And you have to have patience because you got to work with people and, they're not all moving at the same pace. And, sometimes they can be a little challenging to deal with. And so you really have to be at your best. And when your cortisol is out of whack, one of the things that happens is your short-term memory does not function very well. Everybody's probably had that experience that, like, if you're taking a test or something comes up and you kind of freeze and your brain freezes, you just can't think straight when you're under a lot of stress. Another thing that happens when you're under a lot of stress, of course, is we don't sleep well. And part of the explanation is that cortisol has a circadian rhythm. It's supposed to go up in the early hours of the morning so that your eyes pop open and you leap out of bed ready to start your day. And then it's supposed to gently go down over the day so that at night you're relaxed and you fall asleep and you sleep soundly through the night. But what happens a lot of the time is that circadian rhythm gets out of whack, and then you press snooze maybe a couple of times, and then you drag yourself over to the coffee pot because that little jolt of caffeine gives our brain a boost in cortisol so we can function like a human being for a while. So once you get moving, then usually we're kind of okay for a while until that bewitching hour in the middle of the afternoon, 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon. Then we get this crash. And that's when you need caffeine or sugar or just something to make it through till supper. And then a common thing that happens is after supper, we kind of nod off on the couch while we're watching TV, but early, 7:38. And if you stay up late enough, then like 10 o'clock, now you get the second wind and your brain is awake and then you can't fall asleep. So this pattern is very consistent with a problem with cortisol. But this is so common that it's kind of normal, right? It's kind of normal to press snooze and drink coffee and take a sleeping pill, but it's not normal. And there are things that we can do to get over that and to get past it. And that's just a couple of the things that cortisol does.
Well, and I think it's so really important that people, one, understand that rhythm. And again, what we're doing with caffeine, because coffee was just, I never drank coffee until I got into being a professional and I'd say a stressed out real estate agent. And I was constantly meeting people for a cup of coffee, or we're having coffee in the office. And then I was like, okay, now I'm bringing it home and I'm having it at home. And then it just became like a habit. And for me, one of the things I did is I just got it out of my life. It's gone. No more coffee anymore. So I'm curious on when you think about that, how can we change our habits to again increase that naturally, that cortisone, our hormones, so that we're less stressed and that we're having more success?
So I'm so glad you asked, because this is something where it causes a lot of medical issues, mood symptoms, depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. But if you go to your doctor to say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm not sleeping, I'm gaining weight, all these kinds of things, your doctor really only has prescriptions to offer you, right? Sleeping pills, antidepressants, or they'll just say, you're normal, which is just really frustrating, or they'll tell you that it's from stress, but truly you don't need a medical school degree to understand. And they don't really have tools that they can give, but there really are things that we can be doing. And so I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk about that.
Yay!
Okay. So the first thing to know is that your brain can't tell the difference between your imagination and reality. So if you are thinking all the worst case scenarios in your head and you're worrying about things and you're reliving that conversation over and over again, you are just making things worse. If you can learn to be one of those optimistic people, one of those glass half full people, if you can think about the positives, you can take the same amount of stress and you can actually protect your body from some of the harmful negative effects of stress. So if you can change what you're thinking, that is powerful medicine. And so some of the tricks, the hardest part is recognizing that you're doing it, right? Otherwise, we just kind of get caught in these cycles. But if you can catch yourself, we call it stinking thinking. If you catch yourself with the stinking thinking, just say stop and say it out loud, put your hand up. That stop kind of breaks the thought pattern. And then you can purposely decide, okay, I'm going to think about the sun is out today. It's Friday. I'm glad that it's busy. That's a good kind of stress, whatever it is. That really changes the chemistry in your body. Another one of my favorite tips is gratitude. So when you are stressed out, overwhelmed, you're had it up to here, if you can stop and think of 3 things that you're grateful for, and no matter how bad things are, you can always find something to be grateful for. But your body can't feel stress, fear, anxiety, bitterness, and gratitude at the same time. So you can't always control the stresses in your life, right? You can't control if a deal falls through or, the home inspection turns up something terrible. We can't control everything, but we do have some control over how we allow stress to affect us. So that's the good news.
Well, and I wanted to interrupt, right? That's a perfect way to say, number one, as a real estate agent, often people turn to me to kind of see, should we be really freaked out about this? Or should we not be? And I've realized that one of the things that's really important is that I say, well, this could go a lot of different ways, but worrying about it, stressing out about it, creating all that negative ideas of, oh my gosh, it's all going to be horrible. And you're not going to make any money on selling the house because now it's costing so much, as you just said, because what just came up in the home inspection is so scary and the unknowns are scary. We don't know how the buyers are going to react, or, all of that is just is a very bad use. Jack Canfield says a very bad use of your creative juices.
That's great.
Because you can create it the other way too. And like you just said, you can all of a sudden, just stop. I've heard people say cancel, whatever it is that makes you stop thinking those things. For me, I always have this vision, and it's probably because of my age. When I was a kid, I used to watch those little Disney movies, and they were the little shorts. And you would see Goofy, and Goofy would have a little picture of a little devil version of Goofy with little horns on one shoulder. And then on the other shoulder was a little Goofy angel version with angel wings. And each one of them was yelling in his ear saying, different things. Like, of course, the devil guy was saying, negative, negative, negative. And the angel, and he's looking at, both of them as if he could see, there's a real devil angel kind of, and it's the negative and the positive And that's the way I think about it. Because again, I can't believe I still catch myself thinking really negative thoughts about myself. And sometimes it's just like I'll share one story, and I'm sure if you could share a story, I would love it. You can think of one while I'm sharing this one real quick. So when I was a teenager, I felt awkward. I felt super ugly. I mean, and partly because of all the other stuff that was going on in my life. You know, I had a mother who was an alcoholic. You know, my dad had disappeared. There's all these things that are going on. My sister's getting put in foster home, and there's all this awful thing. But my mom also, you know, was one of the people who said that I was ugly, but I was an ugly duckling. She said, maybe someday you'll turn into a swan. And it's so funny because she has me so convinced. I mean, and you know, she's passed away now, but I recently was going back and I was looking at the photos of me, and I grew up on the islands in the Florida Keys, and it was so interesting because, of course, I was in a bikini often, and I was looking at the photos, and I remember in my mind how ugly I was and how fat I was, because those are two things my mom said over and over, not to mention there were a lot of other people who said it. And so I totally 100% hook, line, and sinker, I believed it. And I was looking at those photos. It was about a year ago. I was looking at those photos and I thought, oh my gosh, I wasn't fat. And I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, I could see I was a little awkward. I was a little, you know, whatever, gangly or kind of a little bit awkward, but I wasn't ugly. I wasn't this terrible, fat, ugly child that my mother believed and said to me over and over. And I believed how ugly I was and fat I was. And then it was funny because the other day I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how fat I am. And I was like, because something was a little bit snug on one of the buttons, which it doesn't mean that, you know, you don't grow a little bit extra weight here and there. But I immediately went in deep on my invalidations of how ugly I was and how fat I was. And I was like, whoa. I was like, wait a minute. And then I walked up to a mirror, you know, with all my freckles, and I was told how ugly freckles were. And I said, I love my freckles. They're kisses from angels. And I came up with all sorts of funny things of myself in front of that mirror. And I realized that I have the most powerful opinion of myself. And I would say that for anyone who's listening, you have the most powerful idea and evaluation of yourself. So be nice to yourself. And every time reevaluate and go on the positive, because the negative are lies. They're just lies. And no matter who told you them, for me, you know, I thought it was a very trusted, because I was a kid, a very trusted source. My mother said I was ugly. My mother said I was fat. So of course, you know, who are you going to believe? Yeah. And I'm sure you have a story where your thoughts of...
So I guess my story that pops to mind is when I was, you know, young, I was super excited about softball. I had seen it. I was like, I thought this was going to be the greatest thing. And I signed up, and I was not very good at it. And one time my mom made a comment, and, you know, my mom didn't say negative comments. You know, I didn't hear things like what your mom said, but she did make a comment. I hit the ball. I hit the ball. And she said, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Right. It wasn't a bad meaning comment, but how I internalized that was my mom thinks that I'm a bad softball player. Therefore, I must be a bad softball player. And my whole life growing up from then, I have never again played. So I missed out on what might have been really fun. I didn't try out, you know, in middle school or in high school because that you know, message had been planted in my head. And, you know, I missed out on a lot of fun because I just kept reinforcing that. And I see that a lot with professional, successful women, because we tend to hold ourselves up to a high ideal. Like we're often perfectionistic and like we really want to excel. And so if we don't quite meet our often very unrealistic goals, we're really hard on ourselves, and that's not good for us. And it's not fair. So that voice in our head is really important. And it's not only important like for our psyche and our emotions, but it's also important for our physical body because it affects our hormones and it affects what's going on in our body. So that stinking thinking, it interferes with your happiness, but it also interferes with your health. And if your health isn't great, then it can interfere with your success.
I agree 100%. And I think it's so important to put it in that kind of perspective, and hearing it from you, a doctor, I think it's very valuable. Just like I was saying that my mother was somebody I really trusted. I think it's really important to have doctors talk to us about the real true cause of some of the health issues that are challenging us, because so often I think some of the basics are being overlooked. And that's one of the reasons I love having you as a guest. Yay!
Oh, well, thank you. It's so good to be here. I really feel like women, especially when we have symptoms, they're often not a disease, right? Like we're sometimes scared it's a disease and we go to the doctor and they do whatever tests. They tell us everything is normal. But if you don't feel good, right? Like if you're exhausted, if you're bloated, if you can't lose weight, if you kind of feel like just flat and unmotivated, you've lost sex drive, like you don't feel right. You don't feel like yourself. I hear that all the time. I just want to feel like myself again. But when your doctor tells you everything is normal, that's very invalidating, right?
Oh my gosh.
What's wrong with me? It must be like a personality defect or something. But the reality is a lot of times the problem is a hormone imbalance, whether it's a cortisol problem, because when cortisol goes off, cortisol regulates all your other hormones. So if cortisol's out of whack, it makes it so that your thyroid hormone can't work. It's not that your thyroid gland doesn't work. The thyroid gland makes the right amount of thyroid hormones, but they can't work. So you feel like you're hypothyroid, but your lab test is normal. They mess up your female hormones. The cortisol messes up your female hormones. So you can start to have menstrual irregularities or more PMS or more menopausal symptoms. But, when you go, most of the time, doctors won't measure your hormone levels. They might measure your thyroid test, but they don't really usually measure the other ones. So you kind of get blown off, and it's really frustrating. It's really aggravating. If you're not told it's normal, which that's like the thing that aggravates me the most. That's the name, aggravates me the most. But the other thing that they'll do is they'll write you a prescription, right? And most of the time, the prescription is just they want to do something. They want to help you. Doctors are nice. They want to help you. But, the prescription is not really fixing the root cause of the problem, which is that you're hormonally imbalanced, maybe because you're so stressed out. But if we could get your hormones back in balance, you could feel so much better. And the trouble is, because this is not a disease, there isn't really a prescription to treat it. And therefore, doctors don't really have something in their toolbox that they can do to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's so important is so often, number one, what you just said, that invalidation. So I'd also say the same thing. Just like, you discovering that you're being negative to yourself, you're saying that inner voice is being negative. Anytime you also have someone you think of as an opinion leader in your life, as somebody that you trust who invalidates you, that's when you also need to be like, stop. And whatever you need to do, even if you need to say it to that person or if you need to say it to yourself, and then let's look for another way to find the validating thing, because it's not fair to continue to keep invalidating yourself. It's so important. In a weird transition, I'm going to go into mold and health risks of mold. And part of the reason I say that is because I have known, again, many women, particularly, who are real estate agents, and they don't even know that they had mold in their house, and they're having all these health issues. And again, they're feeling extremely invalidated because they can't get to the source of what's happening. And so I do want to kind of talk a little bit about what are the health risks of mold.
Yeah. Now, there are all different molds out there, and they can do sort of different things. But as a general overview, if somebody becomes sick from mold exposure, often the symptoms are extreme fatigue, brain fog, just like not computing in their brain. And there are often strange symptoms that don't really fit the kinds of things that we're used to. So there can be things like strange pains, like ice pick pains, or like migraine headaches and like weird skin symptoms. They're odd things that, like when you go to the doctor, your doctor's kind of scratching your head, doesn't really know what to do with it. So in medical school, I was never taught about mold. I was not taught about like, how would you test someone, or how would you test a home, or, it's just this big black hole that doctors have not been taught about. So doctors sometimes know about mold allergies. So like if you go into a musty basement and your nose starts to run and your eyes itch, fine, you're allergic to mold. But this is something different. And the confusing thing here is it doesn't affect everybody the same. So certain of us have certain genes where our bodies don't tolerate it. And even if we leave, we can't get the mold toxins out of our system. So the mold release toxins in the air, they get in our system, they make us sick. And even if you get away from the mold, that it doesn't really get out of your body. So sometimes people can be sick for many, many, many years, before they finally figure it out. And if I can tell you just a couple of stories about how this looks. So I had a patient who came to see me, and she is a doctor. So she is, a very bright lady. But she was so scattered and confused. And we were really worried, like, how can she function as a doctor? Her brain clearly wasn't working. And what we found is when we would talk to her on Monday morning, she was pretty good. Like she seemed pretty normal. But when we talked to her at the end of the week, like she couldn't put 2 and 2 together. And eventually we figured out that she was in a very, very old building, her office. She sat right under an air vent and they found mold in the building and it was blowing right where she sat at her desk. And so all day long, she was being exposed to this mold. And then she'd go home for the weekend and she felt better. So she is somebody who doesn't really have the genes. When she left the building, she felt better. When she got away from that office, she did get better. It's just that she had kept going back because she didn't know. But we have other people where I have a patient who does have the genes. And when she was a young adult, her home got flooded. And, there was mold everywhere. It was very obvious. And she did start to feel sick after that. And that was, now she's in her late 40s and she's still sick. And it's only recently that, we've realized what's going on and that we're starting to help her. So it looks different in different people. It doesn't always get better just because you leave. And it's really important to know because doctors don't know. And there are so many people wandering around feeling very ill. And, they get invalidated because doctors do every test possible. I don't know, they go to Mayo Clinic, they go see all the specialists, all the ologists, and yet nobody can find anything wrong with them. And it's not because nothing is wrong. It's because they're just not doing the right tests. Yeah. And it's very difficult sometimes for spouses because the spouse might live in the same house and they might feel fine. So, it's hard to blame it on the environment. If everybody in the home is sick, then it's much more obvious.
And I think, and that's what I was just going to say. One thing that I have seen happen that is very invalidating is when you have one person who is obviously getting sick and the other person isn't, especially just in a couple. Like say, for instance, the husband is not affecting because everybody's body is different. And then it becomes very invalidating for the other person because, again, they went to the doctor, they did the test, and they still can't figure it out. And I think that mold is something that, again, is so often overlooked. I just recently had this happen with a home inspection, and from the seller's viewpoint, it is brutal because number one, they found some mold in like the crawl space. Oh, well, it's the crawl space. It's underneath the house. Oh no, it's no big deal. And then there was a little tiny issue that was with the HVAC. And so they had somebody come in, and then when they opened it up, they discovered there's mold. And the wife's a nurse. And she's like, again, there's a bit of unbelievability, like, no, this couldn't be affecting us.
And it can be very expensive to remediate it. If I can tell you just one more story, my husband is a pain specialist. And so he was treating somebody with hip pain. And so this guy had come for many, many years over time. And he was, a top level executive, very successful man, but he kept going downhill. And it was like he was developing dementia, but he was, in his 40s or 50s. Gosh. He just kept getting worse year after year after year. Eventually, his daughters, who were teenagers, also started to have a lot of cognitive problems. And eventually somebody looked under their house and found tons of mold. The home had been built on a site that previously was a garbage dump. And they had just covered it over. They built the houses on there, and the whole neighborhood was just a total disaster. But this man had to go out on disability by that point. So it can be a very serious problem. And the mold is usually hidden. So you don't necessarily smell it. You can't see it. It can be behind we had a leak in our home, and I had a high suspicion. One of my kids was sleeping in the basement. He was not feeling good all the time. And we pulled off the sheetrock and found that a light from the outside of the house hadn't been sealed properly. Water was leaking in. And so the back side of the sheetrock was all covered in black mold.
Wow. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, because just like my client recently, where they found it in the crawl space, and he's like, oh, it's no big deal. It's fine. And then of course we found it in the HVAC afterwards. And then they went to the roof and found it. Okay, now we've got it all the way through the house, but still, it's still unbelievable to them that there's in any way, shape or form that it's impacting them. And I'm like,
yeah. And the truth is, perhaps it's not so much impacting them, but that doesn't mean the next people to purchase the home won't be very, very ill. So, it's just something that needs to be remediated. It would be a terrible, if you knew about it and didn't disclose it and didn't do something about it, like morally, that would just not be right.
Oh, yeah. And it's doing exactly that. It's actually delaying the whole thing by actually a couple months, which is, of course, inconveniencing everybody. Yeah. But again, it is that actual basic moral thing of I'm not selling my house if it has any bit of something in it that could harm another person. And so they are stepping up, but it's still something that is just so shocking and unbelievable. Again, like you said, just about like behind the sheetrock, black mold, when number one, you couldn't see it. And a lot of times when something is leaking, like what you're talking about, what we've discovered, at least in my experience, is that happened over time. It wasn't there. You might have done a home inspection when you first got it. You might inspect once a year, but still you're missing something because, again, it's out of sight. It's beneath the house. It's behind the wall and behind the drywall or the sheetrock. It's just, it's something that we have to kind of look a little bit deeper for. So anyway, I know we're out of time, but I want to say thank you for all that you do, and for, just again, these are such important topics that we need to discuss. So of course, my very important question that I love to ask is, how do you create yays every day?
So I work with women and men every day, and what I help them to see is what I really believe, that living well is the best medicine. And when you live well, you can feel your best, function your best success, and that brings a lot of yays.
Yay! I agree 100%. So Dr. Deb, will you tell people all about your book, if they wanted to hire you as a speaker, anything, and if they want to have you on their radio show or their podcast or TV, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called This Is Not Normal, A Busy Woman's Guide to Symptoms of Hormone Imbalance. And the purpose is it's got lots of like checklists and things. So you can, check to see, could you have a cortisol problem, or is it your thyroid or whatever hormone it might be? And you can actually download a free copy at isityourhormones.com. And it also talks about how could you find a doctor to help you? Because if your regular doctor isn't really giving you the answers you need, it's important to know who could you turn to. And there's lots more information on my website, which is signaturewellness.org.
Signaturewellness.org, right?
That's right.
And your book, is it also on Amazon?
It is, yeah. It's available on Amazon. Okay. Yep.
Awesome. And then do you have social media people can follow?
I do. I am on Instagram at Dr. Deb Matthew. And I am also on Facebook. My Facebook name is not very good, but it's Deborah.Matthew.360.
Okay, well, it's fine. I just want people to know so they can search you, because you can search and find. But I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for being with us. And I am going to ask you if you'll lift your voice and let's share a yay together, okay? Yay!
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may know me as the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And if you want more help in getting from where you are to where you want to be, I want to encourage you to listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show